The city never slept, and neither did the secrets buried beneath Manhattan's skyline. In a glass tower overlooking Central Park, silence reigned, thick, heavy, expectant. The penthouse glowed with dim lights, shadows dancing across marble floors. At 3:17 a.m., the private elevator chimed, and Ambrose Blackwell stepped inside his empire, reeking of arrogance and someone else's perfume. He loosened his tie, humming softly to himself, unaware that tonight he was walking into a war zone. His $1,000 shoes tapped softly against the polished floor, his lips curled into a smug grin. He'd just spent the evening at the Rosewood with Cassandra, his latest conquest, younger, hungrier, always agreeable. As he crossed the foyer, he paused. Something felt off. That's when he saw her, Jacqueline. She stood near the piano, bathed in the soft glow of the chandelier. Her hair was down. She wore a pale silk robe that brushed just above her swollen belly, 5 months along and glowing, but not with happiness. Her eyes weren't puffy from crying. They were sharp, dry, unforgiving. Ambrose blinked. "Jackie, what are you doing up?" She said nothing, just stared. His smirk wavered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. "I told you I had meetings tonight," he added, his voice lower, cautious. She moved slowly toward the bar, her bare feet soundless against the cold stone. Every step precise, every second stretched like elastic, ready to snap. "You had champagne," she said quietly, motioning to the unopened bottle resting in its bucket. Ambrose swallowed. "It was a gift from a client." Jacqueline nodded, the hint of a smile curling one side of her lips. She picked up the cut crystal glass he used for celebrations, the one engraved with his initials. With deliberate calm, she poured a generous splash of the bourbon he kept hidden behind the imported wines. Then came the moment that cracked the world in half. She slipped her wedding ring from her finger and dropped it, a soft, metallic clink. The ring sank to the bottom, spinning before settling like a secret finally revealed. Ambrose's breath caught. His bravado vanished. "Jacqueline, I hope she was worth it," she said, meeting his gaze. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was final, solid, a verdict. His heart pounded. "This isn't Jackie, please. Let's talk." "I'm done talking." She pulled an envelope from the robe's pocket and slid it across the counter toward him. "Divorce papers, signed, dated. I already spoke to my lawyer. You'll get the official notice by morning." "Wait, you're not serious," he began, stepping forward. She held up her hand. "Don't. Come closer." And he froze. For years, Ambrose had been the man who moved mountains, closed billion-dollar deals, and made people bend to his will. But now, for the first time, he was the one cornered. Exposed. Jacqueline looked him over, his wrinkled shirt, the lipstick stain near his collar, the faint trace of someone else's perfume clinging to his skin. And she laughed. Not a joyful laugh. A cold, dry, almost pitying sound. "You didn't even bother to shower," she whispered. "Jacqueline, you're overreacting. This is nothing," he said, trying to regain control. "It didn't mean anything." She tilted her head, studying him. "It meant enough that you lied. It meant enough that you risked everything, and you thought I'd never find out." He opened his mouth, but no excuse came. "I'm pregnant, Ambrose. Your child is growing inside me, and while I've been throwing up every morning, worrying about the baby, about us, you've been out there playing Bachelor of the Year." She looked around their opulent penthouse. The grand piano, the modern art, the coldness disguised as success. "I gave you my love, my loyalty, my body, and you gave it away for a night." "I made a mistake," he muttered, his voice cracking. "Don't do this." Jacqueline picked up her coat from the back of a nearby chair. "I didn't do this. You did. I'm just finally done pretending." "Where are you going?" he demanded. "Somewhere you won't follow," she replied, walking toward the elevator. The air felt like glass, fragile, ready to shatter. Ambrose stepped forward, reaching out, panic rising. "Wait, Jacqueline, I can fix this. Just give me a chance." She turned slowly, her hand on her belly. "I gave you 100 chances, and every time I chose you. Tonight, for the first time, I'm choosing me." With that, the elevator doors closed. Ambrose stood in silence. Behind him, the ring sat at the bottom of his glass, cold, gleaming, and final. He picked it up with shaking hands, stared into the amber liquid, and for the first time in his life, Ambrose Blackwell didn't know what came next. But Jacqueline did. This was the beginning. Jacqueline Blackwell wasn't born into wealth. She didn't inherit a family name that opened doors or grow up in penthouses with doormen and black tie galas. No, Jacqueline Mitchell came from the kind of town where the highlight of the year was the county fair, and the fanciest meal you'd find was at the diner near the train tracks. She was raised in upstate New York, in a modest two-bedroom house with chipping paint and a swing that always creaked. Her father was a mechanic who smelled of engine oil and cheap cigarettes. Her mother was a school librarian who read poetry aloud while folding laundry. Life was simple, sometimes hard, but always grounded in love and grit. From a young age, Jacqueline stood out, not because she was loud or flashy, but because she paid attention. She listened when people spoke. She memorized birthdays. She knew how to comfort without words and how to diffuse an argument before it exploded. Teachers adored her. Friends leaned on her. She had a quiet strength that made people feel safe. And she had big dreams. While her classmates imagined settling down nearby, Jacqueline saw herself beyond the hills and valleys of her hometown. She wanted a city skyline, fast-paced days, important meetings, and a life that would mean something. She got a full-ride scholarship to Columbia University, packed everything she owned in 2 suitcases, and boarded a Greyhound bus to Manhattan at 19, leaving behind everything familiar. She majored in economics and minored in art history, not because she loved numbers, but because she believed power resided in understanding systems, and she wanted to change hers. She juggled 3 part-time jobs while acing her classes: barista by morning, assistant at a real estate firm by afternoon, and server at a rooftop bar by night. Exhausted? Always. Determined? Unstoppable. And then, during her junior year, she met Ambrose. It was at a fundraising gala for inner-city youth programs, where Jacqueline was working coat check. Ambrose Blackwell had already made his name as a rising star in Manhattan's real estate market. He was charming, polished, the kind of man who always knew the right thing to say. While waiting for his driver, he struck up a conversation with Jacqueline. He was surprised by her insights, her humor, and the sharp intelligence she didn't try to flaunt. "You don't belong behind a coat counter," he told her. "And you don't belong in a world where people only talk to you because of your money," she replied. He laughed. She didn't flinch. He asked her to dinner that same night. From there, their romance ignited. He brought her into his world of rooftop cocktails, business conferences in Milan, and nights at the plaza. She, in turn, grounded him. She reminded him of who he was before the success, before the boardrooms, the TV interviews, the pressure to always be more. They balanced each other, or so she thought. 2 years after that gala, they were married. The wedding was a private affair at a vineyard in Napa Valley. Only 30 guests, no press, no flash. Just vows whispered under the California sun. Jacqueline wore a simple dress and a borrowed veil. Ambrose said she made every other woman disappear. They moved into the Penthouse shortly after. Jacqueline left her job at a mid-tier financial consultancy firm to focus on building a home. Not just physically, but emotionally. A place of peace, warmth, and unconditional support. For a time, they had it. Sunday mornings with jazz playing softly, dinners with homemade pasta, laughter echoing through spacious rooms that used to feel too big for just 2 people. But slowly, things changed. Ambrose became consumed with growth, acquisitions, and status. He started hosting parties Jacqueline never felt comfortable at, rooms full of people who sized her up by her dress, her watch, her silence. She didn't belong, and she knew it, at least not in the way they measured worth. Still, she smiled. She stood by him, because she believed love meant loyalty, even when it was hard. And then came the news. She was pregnant. She found out one rainy Tuesday morning in late October. She had been feeling dizzy for weeks and thought it was stress. The second line on the stick changed everything. At first, she panicked. She wasn't sure if she was ready. But when she told Ambrose, he lit up. He lifted her in his arms and spun her around the living room. "We're building a legacy," he whispered into her hair. She believed him. For weeks, she read every book on pregnancy, signed up for yoga, cooked healthier meals, bought soft lullaby playlists. She began envisioning a nursery, a name, a future. Ambrose said he was excited, but he missed appointments, left town without warning, and came home later and later, smelling different, talking less. Still, she gave him grace, until the night she couldn't anymore. The night he came home from a meeting, with perfume on his shirt collar, lipstick on his cuff, and guilt he wasn't even smart enough to hide. That night, she didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. Instead, she poured his favorite bourbon, took off her wedding ring, and dropped it in his glass like a silent declaration. I'm done. But Jacqueline Blackwell wasn't just done being a wife. She was done being quiet. She was done being polite. She was done shrinking herself for a man who couldn't even see the woman standing in front of him. Because Jacqueline may have entered this life as the girl from nowhere, but what Ambrose forgot was that she had built herself long before he ever showed up. And now, she was about to remind the world and herself who she really was. The penthouse was more than just a home. It was a symbol, a trophy. 35 floors above Manhattan, with wraparound windows that showcased the city's endless pulse, it stood as a monument to Ambrose Blackwell's rise to power. Every detail screamed luxury: imported Italian marble floors that reflected light like water, modern art curated by a Sotheby's consultant, a Steinway grand piano untouched by fingers but polished weekly, and a wine cellar hidden behind a biometric lock. The kitchen, barely used, boasted chef-grade appliances. The living room featured a custom-made sofa from Milan. Even the air smelled expensive, like sandalwood, bergamot, and dominance. From the outside, they were perfection, Manhattan's golden couple. He, a billionaire real estate mogul who transformed crumbling blocks into elite skyscrapers. She, the graceful and mysterious wife who rarely gave interviews but appeared in photographs with impeccable style and serene eyes. Their lives were chronicled in tabloids, business magazines, and high society columns. They hosted charity galas that raised millions, attended art shows alongside tech tycoons, vacationed on private islands reachable only by jet or yacht. When they walked into a room, people noticed. When they kissed at red carpet events, the world swooned. But beneath the glittering surface lay cracks that couldn't be polished over. When Jacqueline first moved into the penthouse, she was overwhelmed. Not by the wealth, but by the coldness. The silence of rooms too perfect to disturb. The sterility of white walls and chrome fixtures. It was beautiful, yes, but it didn't feel like home. She tried to make it warmer. She added velvet throws, fresh flowers, handmade candles. She cooked meals from scratch, even when Ambrose didn't come home to eat them. She invited a few old college friends over, trying to recreate the cozy dinners she remembered from her early 20s. But slowly, everything was overtaken by Ambrose's world. His assistant, Miranda, began managing their calendar. If Jacqueline wanted a dinner date with her own husband, she had to check with Miranda first. If she wanted to plan a trip, it had to align with fiscal quarters and board meetings. Their social circle shifted too. Gone were the friends with inside jokes and unfiltered conversations. In came hedge fund managers, startup founders, and fashion publicists who spoke in branded hashtags and investment acronyms. No one asked how Jacqueline was doing. They asked what she was wearing. At first, she played along. She wore the dresses Ambrose liked, sleek, structured, usually black. She smiled when he made jokes about normal people. She stood quietly beside him while he posed for photos. But each time, she felt a little piece of herself fading. She wasn't Jacqueline anymore. She was Mrs. Blackwell. The trophy wife. There was a turning point. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon when Ambrose returned from a meeting and passed her in the hallway without noticing the flowers she'd arranged, the lunch she'd prepared, or the silk dress she'd bought just for him. He kissed her cheek absently. "Don't wait up tonight." Then he was gone. She stood there, alone, in 5,000 square feet of polished emptiness, realizing that she didn't exist in his world anymore. She was background, scenery, a part of the brand. But it hadn't always been that way. In the early days, their apartment in Soho had been cramped but full of life. They'd eat ramen on the floor, play card games late into the night, laugh at Netflix documentaries, and dream together. Back then, he used to send her texts like "thinking of your smile" in the middle of meetings. Back then, he looked at her like she was magic. The penthouse changed that, or maybe power did. Ambrose became obsessed with scale. More clients, more floors, more zeros. He used to design buildings with stories in mind. Now he built them for maximum profit per square inch. The man who once stopped to help a stranger on the street now avoided eye contact with waitstaff. The man who cried watching Up now scoffed at emotions. Jacqueline tried to hold on to their bond. She suggested therapy. He laughed it off. "What would we even talk about? Our relationship is fine." When she pushed further, he grew colder, distant, dismissive. So she stopped asking. Instead, she threw herself into volunteering. She worked with underfunded schools, brought art supplies to children's shelters, mentored girls who reminded her of her younger self. It gave her purpose, something real, something that didn't require a publicist's approval. But every time she came home, the penthouse reminded her where she stood. Or rather, where she didn't. Even their bedroom changed. It went from being a sanctuary to a showroom. White bedding with gold stitching. No photos on the walls. Just a minimalist painting Ambrose bought because it matched the mood. She couldn't remember the last time they'd fallen asleep tangled in each other's arms. These days he was either away or turned toward the far edge of the bed, scrolling his phone. Jacqueline started writing in a journal, little notes to herself, reminders of who she used to be, who she still was beneath the silence, beneath the silk and the stone. She wrote about the baby, how she imagined their laugh, what stories she'd tell them, how she'd never let them feel unseen. It was those pages, those inked hopes that reminded her she wasn't crazy, that what she was living wasn't love, that just because a place glittered didn't mean it was gold. And that's when the shift began. Quiet at first, internal. She started dressing for herself again. Wore colors, soft fabrics, flats when her feet ached instead of stilettos to impress strangers. She stopped pretending to like champagne and started drinking tea again, chamomile like her mother used to make. She carved out corners of the penthouse that were hers, tiny sanctuaries filled with books, warmth, life. But Ambrose didn't notice. Or maybe he chose not to. He was too busy chasing admiration from people who'd forget him by next season. So when the betrayal finally came, Jacqueline wasn't surprised. Devastated? Yes, but not surprised. Because she knew by then that she'd already lost him, long before the lipstick on his collar, long before the perfume that wasn't hers, long before the lies. She had only been trying to pretend. Now the pretending was over. Ambrose Blackwell wasn't born a villain. He was born into struggle, a tiny apartment in the Bronx, peeling paint on the ceiling, and a mother who worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. His father disappeared when he was 6, and the only legacy the man left behind was a box of unpaid bills and a rusted-out Dodge that never ran. Ambrose grew up hungry, not just for food, but for more. More than welfare lines, more than second-hand clothes, more than people's pity. He wanted power, control. He wanted to be the man no one could ignore. He was smart, and he knew it. He turned a community college scholarship into a transfer to NYU. He interned, networked, stayed late, volunteered for grunt work, and learned every trick from the wolves in suits who ruled the Manhattan skyline. By 28, he had launched Blackwell Developments. By 30, he was a millionaire. By 35, a billionaire. But success didn't make him better. It made him colder. See, somewhere along the way, love became a luxury he didn't believe in. It was a transaction, an image, a partnership with PR value. When he married Jacqueline, he did love her. But it was the kind of love he could measure. A woman who didn't chase his money, who gave him calm, who made him look grounded. But what he never admitted, even to himself, was that he resented her too. He resented her softness, her need for connection, her questions about his schedule, her gentle reminders to rest, to slow down, to be human. In his world, softness was weakness. And he was terrified of weakness. When Jacqueline got pregnant, he told everyone he was thrilled. That it was the next chapter. Legacy, he called it. But privately, it terrified him. He didn't know how to be a father. He only knew how to build, how to conquer. What would he teach a child? How to work 18-hour days and ignore everyone else? That's when the cracks widened. The late nights, the canceled dinners, the avoidance, and then Cassandra. Cassandra Monroe was everything Jacqueline wasn't, and that was the appeal. Where Jacqueline asked questions, Cassandra nodded. Where Jacqueline wore cardigans and quiet elegance, Cassandra draped herself in silk and seduction. Where Jacqueline said, "Come home," Cassandra said, "Take me somewhere no one will find us." They met at a fundraiser in Tribeca. Ambrose was tired, bored, feeling the weight of becoming a father, of trying to be the husband he knew Jacqueline deserved. And there she was, Cassandra. Young, mysterious, with just enough vulnerability to seem real and just enough boldness to seem dangerous. She complimented his cufflinks, he bought her champagne, It started with texts, then dinners, then weekends at hotels under false names. He told himself it wasn't serious, that it was stress relief, that it would end. But it didn't, because Cassandra knew exactly how to keep him hooked, just enough drama to keep it interesting, just enough admiration to feed his ego. She stroked the part of him Jacqueline didn't, the man who still saw himself as that poor kid from the Bronx trying to prove something. With Cassandra, he wasn't a husband. He wasn't a soon-to-be father. He was a god. So when Jacqueline started asking questions about the missed appointments, the unfamiliar perfume, the change in his tone, Ambrose snapped. "You're too sensitive. You're imagining things. Don't start." And each time Jacqueline shrank a little smaller, until her silence felt convenient. He never thought she'd leave. Because in his mind, she needed him. She didn't have a career like his. She wasn't powerful. She wasn't rich. And he, Ambrose Blackwell, had given her this life. So the night he came home reeking of betrayal, he wasn't even subtle about it. He walked into the penthouse like a king returning from battle, smug, untouchable. And then she dropped the ring, and everything shattered. But here's the thing Ambrose never realized. Villains aren't born. They're made. Choice by choice, lie by lie. And he had chosen his mask so often, he no longer remembered the man underneath. He stood there, stunned, watching Jacqueline walk away, and for the first time he wasn't in control. His empire couldn't stop her. His money couldn't fix it. His charm couldn't undo it. Cassandra, of course, was waiting at a luxury suite downtown, sipping wine and practicing her best, shocked expression in the mirror. She thought she had won. She thought she would replace Jacqueline, slide into her designer shoes and upgrade the title from mistress to wife. But Ambrose wasn't thinking about Cassandra that night. He was thinking about a glass of bourbon with a ring at the bottom, and the look in Jacqueline's eyes. Not angry, not begging, but done. Truly done. He replayed it over and over in his head. The calm in her voice, the stillness in her body, the way she didn't yell or cry. It would have been easier if she had. He could have fought that. But this was worse. Because when someone is truly done, there's no winning them back. And the worst part? Ambrose didn't miss her because he loved her. He missed her because he finally realized what she was. The only person who ever saw him, not the empire, not the image, not the wealth. Just the man, and he had destroyed that. All for a thrill that faded by sunrise. Now standing in the penthouse he built from ambition and ego, Ambrose Blackwell was left with nothing but silence. And for the first time in years, it scared him. Because silence, unlike Jacqueline, doesn't forgive. The invitation was gold embossed, wrapped in black satin ribbon. The annual Gotham Charitable Trust Gala was not just an event, it was a spectacle. A place where New York's elite paraded their wealth under the banner of philanthropy. A red carpet stretched down Fifth Avenue, camera flashes illuminating gowns and egos alike. For the past 5 years, Ambrose and Jacqueline Blackwell had been the unofficial royal couple of the gala. Hosts, donors, power icons. But this year, something was different. Jacqueline had declined all interviews. She hadn't been photographed in over a month. And Ambrose? He showed up alone at 2 major business events, offering only vague excuses for his wife's absence. People whispered. Was she unwell? Was she hiding the pregnancy? Was their marriage falling apart? The truth, of course, was more scandalous than any theory they could invent. On the night of the gala, Jacqueline stood before her mirror in a room no longer filled with warmth. Her hand rested on the curve of her belly. The baby kicked, reminding her that life moved forward, even when love didn't. She wore a deep emerald gown, not one picked by a stylist, one she chose. Flowing silk that hugged her figure, with a slit up the side and delicate beadwork that shimmered under light. Her hair was swept into a loose, effortless chignon. She looked regal, commanding, unapologetically present. This time, she wasn't attending to support her husband. She was attending for herself. Ambrose was already at the venue, holding court near the champagne bar, surrounded by investors and socialites. Cassandra Monroe, in a gold sequin gown far too tight for comfort, lingered near him, laughing too loudly at his jokes, fingers grazing his sleeve. They thought they had won. Until the crowd shifted. A hush fell. Phones lifted. Heads turned. And there she was, Jacqueline Blackwell, radiant and composed, descending the marble staircase with the poise of a queen who had just reclaimed her throne. Ambrose froze. Cassandra's smile faltered. Jacqueline didn't look at them. Not yet. She greeted the press, posed for photos, and thanked the chairman of the event. She worked the room, not with charm, but with intention. Every conversation was sharp, every interaction strategic. People leaned in, listened, followed her movements like she was gravity itself. When she finally reached Ambrose, he tried to play it cool. "Jackie," he said, offering a hollow smile, "you look incredible." "Thank you," she replied, voice calm. "I almost didn't come." He chuckled nervously. "But you did." She glanced briefly at Cassandra, who was trying and failing not to eavesdrop. "Yes," Jacqueline said, "I decided this night deserved a memory." Ambrose shifted. "Listen, about the other night." "Not here," she interrupted. "I don't want to make a scene." But scenes have a way of writing themselves. The auction began an hour into the gala. Items ranged from private yacht trips to exclusive art. Ambrose stepped on stage to present a $2 million donation. Cameras rolled. Applause thundered. He stood tall, smiling wide, savoring the spotlight. Then Jacqueline raised her hand. "Before you all cheer for Mr. Blackwell," she said, her voice ringing clear, "I think there's something important you should know." The room fell silent. Ambrose's jaw clenched. "Jacqueline, don't." But she stepped forward, heels echoing like gunshots on marble. She pulled a folded document from her clutch. "This is a DNA test," she said, holding it up. "It proves that the man currently pretending to represent honor and family values is not only cheating on his pregnant wife, but has also fathered a second child with the woman standing to his left." Gasps. Audible. Raw. Cassandra turned pale. "What? No, I never." Jacqueline didn't blink. "You sent the results to his office last week." I opened the envelope. Ambrose stepped toward her. "Jacqueline, we can talk about this in private." She held up her hand. "No more privacy. No more secrets. Not when you used our marriage as your brand." Silence engulfed the room. Phones were already recording. Live streaming. Then Jacqueline turned to the crowd. "I supported him, stood beside him, believed in him. But the man you've praised for his generosity and vision? He's a coward, a liar, and worst of all, a man who throws away his family for a fantasy." Ambrose tried to grab the mic, but she stepped back. "I'm done being quiet. I'm done protecting him." She dropped the mic, literally. The sound echoed through the ballroom like a gavel slamming down. Then she walked off the stage, head high, shoulders squared, leaving chaos in her wake. Ambrose stood alone, red-faced, frozen. Cassandra slipped away, her heels clicking like panic. And the audience? They did not clap. They stared, judged, whispered. Later, tabloids would call it the takedown of the decade. A PR firm would resign the next day. Stock in Blackwell Developments would dip. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Because Jacqueline had taken back the power. Not with screaming, not with revenge, but with truth. Unfiltered, unforgiving. And now, everyone knew. The applause never came, not a single clap. After Jacqueline's explosive speech at the gala, the grand ballroom of the Gotham Trust stood frozen in stunned silence. No one knew where to look. At the fallen king, the vanishing mistress, or the woman who had just set fire to everything while smiling. Ambrose left moments later, slipping through a back hallway, his security team scrambling to shield him from reporters already circling like vultures. Cassandra had disappeared into a waiting car, avoiding eye contact with anyone. The once glorious event was reduced to scattered murmurs, nervous laughter, and camera crews being escorted out. But none of that mattered to Jacqueline. Because once she stepped into the back seat of her black SUV, the silence inside hit harder than any headline. She didn't cry immediately. She sat still, hands folded on her lap, eyes fixed on the streetlights flashing past the tinted windows. Her emerald dress shimmered under the car's dim lighting, but the power that carried her across that ballroom was gone. Now she was just tired. Her assistant Marie, who had waited quietly in the front seat, turned slightly. "Jacqueline, that was brave. I don't know how you held it together." Jacqueline let out a slow breath. "I didn't. I just postponed the breakdown." And that breakdown came later. When she stepped out of her dress in the bedroom, kicked off her heels, and caught her reflection in the mirror. She didn't see a woman who'd conquered a scandal. She saw a woman who had been forced to become someone else just to survive. The tears came suddenly, ugly, uncontrollable sobs that echoed off the walls. She pressed her hands against her face, trying to muffle the sound, but there was no stopping it. Every suppressed moment, The betrayal, the loneliness, the humiliation poured out. She sat on the floor, knees tucked to her chest, rocking slowly. I gave him everything, she whispered to no one. And it still wasn't enough. Pregnancy had already stretched her emotions thin, but this was something deeper. It wasn't just grief, it was the loss of her identity. The woman who once believed in love, who thought loyalty could fix anything, was gone. She stayed there for hours. The phone rang. She ignored it. Texts poured in. Ignored. Calls from PR firms, lawyers, even her own mother. She didn't want to explain, didn't want to defend, didn't want to spin. She just wanted to feel. Eventually the crying stopped, not because she felt better, but because her body had nothing left to give. She crawled into bed, still in her makeup, and curled up around the softest pillow like it could hold her together. Sleep came in fragments. She'd drift off only to wake up gasping, her mind replaying every second on stage. Every word, every gasp, every glance. The next morning, headlines exploded. Jacqueline Blackwell exposes husband's infidelity live at gala. Billionaire scandal, love child and mistress revealed in brutal mic drop. Queen of Manhattan no more. Jacqueline Blackwell breaks her silence. TV anchors dissected the speech. Social media erupted in support. Memes flooded the internet. Some called her a hero. Others called her reckless. But everyone was talking about her. And yet, Jacqueline didn't open a single article. Instead, she sat in silence on her balcony, wrapped in a robe, sipping lukewarm tea. The city stretched below her, tall, alive, buzzing. But up here, in this towering cage of glass and steel, she felt like a ghost. Marie arrived later that morning, gently placing a folder on the table. Statements we can issue, media responses, options for your next move. Jacqueline stared at it. I don't want to talk to the press, she said. Marie hesitated. People are calling you brave. This is your moment. Jacqueline looked out over the city. It doesn't feel like a moment. It feels like a funeral. Marie nodded. That's fair. Because part of Jacqueline had died, the part that believed in the life she had built. The woman who believed that sacrifice guaranteed safety. The girl who once thought love was enough. But grief isn't just sadness. It's transformation. And slowly Jacqueline began to accept that she was in mourning, not just for her marriage, but for her old self. So she started small. She cleaned out her closet, not of clothes but of expectations. Dresses chosen to please others. Shoes that hurt but look good in photos. Jewelry gifted after fights. She boxed them all up. She deleted numbers from her phone. People who only called when her last name was useful. Contacts she maintained out of guilt or fear. Gone. She took off her wedding ring for good, placed it in a velvet box and slid it into the back of a drawer she never opened. Then came the decision that shocked everyone. She filed for divorce. Not secretly, not quietly. Her legal team released a simple statement. Ms. Jacqueline Blackwell has filed for divorce. She is focused on her health, her child, and her future. That was it. No scandal, no interviews, no apologies, and the world responded. Women wrote letters, survivors sent messages. People who had never known her face recognized her courage. She had become something no PR agency could craft, real. But inside, Jacqueline was still healing. She cried often, at night, in the shower, sometimes just because a certain song played. She felt everything, because she knew she had to. Grief doesn't leave all at once. It lingers, disguises itself in quiet moments, slips into your tea, your memories, your breath. But with each day she stood a little taller, walked a little further, smiled a little longer, not because it was over, but because she was beginning again. The media storms slowly began to quiet. Jacqueline had disappeared from the spotlight just as quickly as she had taken it by fire. While the headlines still speculated about her next move, she was already 2 steps ahead, planning not just an exit, but a reintroduction. What the world didn't know, and what Ambrose had never cared to find out, was that Jacqueline Blackwell was never just a housewife. Before she became Mrs. Blackwell, before the penthouse and designer gowns, she had been Jacqueline Lynn, a Stanford graduate with a dual degree in business and behavioral economics. She had worked for one of Silicon Valley's fastest-rising startups before stepping away to support Ambrose's growing empire. And during her years in the shadows, she didn't sit idle. She invested, quietly, smartly. Using her maiden name and a network of advisors she trusted from college, Jacqueline began building a portfolio. Clean tech, AI, health tech. She read reports at night when Ambrose thought she was asleep. She negotiated deals while pretending to be on spa retreats. Every signature, every stock, every fund, carefully placed, quietly grown. She never needed Ambrose's money. In fact, by the time their marriage imploded, her net worth, though private, was estimated by insiders to be close to $400 million. But Jacqueline had never craved attention for that. Her power wasn't loud. It was strategic, timed, intentional. And now? Now it was time to use it. 3 weeks after the gala, in a quiet press release that most tabloids missed, a new venture firm launched, Linen Rise. It was described as a fund dedicated to empowering women-led startups, with a focus on sustainable innovation and long-term community impact. Behind the name, however, insiders recognized something else, a power play. Because one of Linen Rise's first acquisitions, a minority-controlling stake in Blackwell Development's primary supply chain partner, a key vendor, Ambrose needed to keep his latest $800 million project on track. The message was clear. Jacqueline wasn't just leaving the table. She was building a new one, and she owned the wood. Ambrose didn't learn about it until it was too late. He was in a board meeting when his CFO slid a report across the table. "Sir, I think you need to see this." Ambrose scanned the numbers, the signature, the shell firm, the new holding company name. Then he saw it. "Lynn," he murmured. "No." He stood up, heart pounding, the humiliation from the gala crashing back like a second wave. She wasn't hiding. She was rising. While he had underestimated her, she had been studying him. And the worst part? She wasn't even gloating. No interviews, no press tour, no dramatic exposé. Just quiet dominance. Back in her newly purchased townhouse on the Upper East Side, Jacqueline sipped espresso while reviewing new pitches from female founders. The townhouse was smaller than the penthouse, but warm. Lived in, full of real things. Books, blankets, life. She had painted the walls herself. Hung art that meant something. Removed every trace of Ambrose from her life, all except one. The baby. Now nearly 8 months along, the little kicks had become strong, predictable. Her child was growing in a world completely different from the one Jacqueline had once imagined. And that was a good thing. Because she no longer wanted her baby to be raised in silence and lies. She wanted strength and honesty, and legacy built not on wealth but on purpose. One afternoon, while walking in Central Park with Marie, they paused near the lake. "Do you ever miss him?" Marie asked gently. Jacqueline looked out at the water, wind brushing her face. "I miss the version of him I thought was real," she said. "But not the man he became." Marie nodded. "He's scared. You know that, right?" Jacqueline smiled faintly. "He should be." Later that week, a private summit was held for emerging women leaders in tech and finance. Jacqueline was the keynote speaker. She didn't wear designer that night. She wore navy slacks, a silk blouse, and a sapphire pendant her grandmother had given her. She looked powerful, but approachable. Not a brand, a human. And when she stepped onto that stage, the room fell silent. No fireworks, no rage, no scandal, just a voice, steady, warm, and commanding. "I was once told that I was lucky to be married to a powerful man," she began. "But what they didn't see was that I was already building something of my own, in the quiet, in the shadows, not because I needed to prove myself, but because I refused to disappear." Applause, not loud, not forced, earned. Jacqueline continued, "Power is not just about money, it's about direction, and legacy, and the choice to lead with values, not ego." More applause. By the end of the night, Linen Rise received over 1,200 pitch submissions from women across the country. The world was no longer asking what happened to Jacqueline Blackwell. They were asking, what will Jacqueline Lynn build next? Ambrose watched it all unfold from the sidelines. On screens in silence, behind glass. His empire was intact for now, but its foundations had shifted. People no longer whispered about him with awe. They whispered about her. And what came next? That was hers to decide. Power doesn't always return with noise. Sometimes it enters the room with the quiet confidence of someone who has already faced their worst fear and survived. Jacqueline Lynn was no longer the woman they remembered. She had changed, and the world began to notice. The first glimpse came at the Women Who Lead Global Summit in Zurich, 6 months after the gala scandal. Jacqueline wasn't expected to attend. Her name wasn't on the schedule, but on the second day the whispers began. "She's here." And then she walked onto the stage. No fanfare, no entourage, just her. She wore an all-white pantsuit, sleek and minimal, her hair pinned back in a sharp low bun, diamond studs glinting under the spotlight. Her presence silenced the room, not with fear, but awe. She didn't smile for cameras. She didn't wave. She stepped to the podium, paused for only a moment, and said, "Reinvention is not about pretending the pain never happened. It's about choosing not to let it define your future." That line alone was quoted in newspapers from New York to London to Tokyo. The media dubbed it the Lynn Rebirth. But it wasn't just words. Jacqueline had transformed, physically, emotionally, spiritually. She trained with vocal coaches to command her presence during keynotes. She hired former military strategists to consult on risk management for her ventures. She began mentoring young female entrepreneurs personally, inviting them to her home, not just her boardroom. And perhaps most striking of all, she returned to the same industry Ambrose once told her she didn't belong in: real estate. But this time, not as his shadow, as his competition. Lynn & Rise launched a $500 million sustainable housing initiative focused on female-led construction firms and minority-owned development agencies. Her firm secured land across Brooklyn, Queens, and Lower Manhattan. The blueprint? Affordable luxury, smart homes, green energy. Ambrose's team didn't laugh. They panicked, because the data didn't lie. Her name had become synonymous with integrity. His? Scandal. Investors once loyal to Blackwell Developments began requesting meetings with Jacqueline. Invitations poured in from governments, universities, and global think tanks. She declined most. She had nothing left to prove. Instead, she focused on her growing baby, now born, a daughter named Aurora. Jacqueline chose the name because it meant dawn. And that's what Aurora became. The start of something new. A reason to get up in the morning. A reason to fight. Not with rage, but with grace. Late at night, while Aurora slept, Jacqueline would sit by the crib and whisper stories about strength, about truth, about second chances. She didn't talk about the scandal. Not yet. But one day, she would. Because her daughter deserved to know the full truth. Not just the headlines. One evening, Jacqueline was invited to a black-tie awards gala in Manhattan, this time not as a guest, but as the honoree. Marie helped zip her into a custom navy gown, elegant, fierce, unforgettable. Her hair flowed in soft waves, lips painted with quiet defiance. As she stepped onto the red carpet, photographers didn't shout her name. They whispered it. Curious. The woman who had gone through hell and come back radiant. Inside, as her name was announced, the applause was thunderous. People rose to their feet, not because of what she'd been through, but because of who she had become. She took the mic. "Years ago," she said, "I thought success meant standing beside someone powerful. I was wrong. Success is standing fully in your own truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is for others." She paused. "Pain doesn't make you weak. Survival doesn't make you bitter. It makes you honest. And honesty is where real power lives." It was the speech of the night. Even Ambrose, watching from his penthouse, couldn't deny it. She had won. But Jacqueline didn't see it as winning. She saw it as becoming. There were still quiet nights, moments where doubt crept in, where she missed the girl she used to be. But then Aurora would laugh, or a new founder would pitch a world-changing idea, and Jacqueline would remember. She wasn't meant to return to her old life. She was meant to build a better one. She began publishing essays, not about Ambrose, not about revenge, but about resilience, healing, purpose. They were raw, honest, and wildly popular. One went viral with the headline, "You don't need a hero, you need yourself." She launched a foundation named after her daughter, the Aurora Fund, to support single mothers in tech, offering grants, mentorship, and childcare stipends. People began calling her the woman who turned pain into policy. She didn't care for the labels. What she cared about? Showing Aurora that you could fall, bleed, cry, and still get back up. That the fall didn't define you. The rise did. The Manhattan skyline glittered like diamonds against the dark velvet of night. Below, the Grand Solis Hotel's rooftop ballroom pulsed with anticipation. Tonight was the annual Empire City Business Awards, an event reserved for the most powerful names in real estate, finance, and innovation. Ambrose Blackwell stood near the bar in a charcoal Armani tuxedo, a glass of scotch in hand, trying to wear his old smirk. But behind the mask, he was unraveling. His empire had taken hit after hit. Key contracts lost, former allies jumping ship. And worst of all, Jacqueline's name kept rising, while his slid into scandal-tainted silence. He thought tonight might be a chance to reclaim some of his former glory. He was wrong. As the crowd sipped champagne and whispered beneath chandeliers, the host stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "please welcome this year's keynote speaker. A leader, a visionary, and a woman redefining power in this city. Jacqueline Lynn." Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Ambrose's grip tightened on his glass. All heads turned toward the marble staircase. And there she was, descending with measured elegance in a tailored crimson gown, slit to the thigh with structured shoulders and a neckline that demanded attention, not for skin, but for strength. Her hair was pinned in an updo, revealing diamond earrings that shimmered like ice. She wasn't just dressed for the night. She was dressed for war. The crowd parted as she approached the stage. No one dared speak. Even Ambrose, once the master of this world, stood frozen. Jacqueline took the microphone. Her eyes scanned the room, landing on Ambrose for a brief second. No fear, no anger, just clarity. "Tonight," she began, "we celebrate success. But let's talk honestly for once about what success really is." She paused. "Success isn't built on lies. It doesn't thrive in shadows. And it certainly isn't defined by who you marry, but by who you become when everything you believed in breaks." The audience hung on every word. "I used to think I was lucky to stand beside a powerful man. Turns out I was powerful all along. I just had to step out of his shadow to see it." Whispers turned to stunned silence. Ambrose clenched his jaw. But Jacqueline wasn't finished. "Some people in this room once tried to silence me, doubted me, betrayed me. They thought I'd disappear after being humiliated, that I'd crumble, hide, run." She smiled. "I didn't." She stepped forward, voice firm. "I bought my silence with power, my pain with purpose, and tonight, I reclaim my voice with results." Then, in a stunning reveal, she clicked a remote, and the screen behind her lit up with a live graph of Lynn and Rise's latest investment round. Over $900 million secured in under 48 hours. 3 major acquisitions in Ambrose's sector. The screen flipped again to a list of new board members. One name made Ambrose's heart stop. Carter Monroe, his former CFO, the man who once told him, "She's smarter than you think." Jacqueline's voice cut through the air. "When you think you've buried a woman, remember, she may have been planting roots." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, executives stood, champagne glasses raised. Ambrose, he stood there, utterly exposed. Jacqueline descended the stage as the host returned to announce the next award. But before she reached her seat, Ambrose stepped in her path. "You planned this," he said, voice low. She met his gaze, calm and unshaken. "No, I earned this." He scoffed. "You humiliated me." "No, Ambrose," she said. "You did that all by yourself. I just let the world see it." His eyes narrowed. "You think you've won?" Jacqueline leaned in slightly. "I didn't play to win. I played to heal. And you're just collateral." She walked past him, heels clicking like gunshots on marble. The guests stared, the band played, and Jacqueline took her seat beside a prominent CEO who offered her a respectful nod. Ambrose stood alone. Again. By the next morning, the headlines were everywhere. Jacqueline Lynn dominates Empire Awards with billion-dollar reveal. Ex-husband Ambrose Blackwell speechless as former wife steals the stage. Public humiliation part 2? Jacqueline Lynn's silent takeover continues. But Jacqueline didn't celebrate. Not publicly. Back home, she poured a glass of water, changed into sweatpants, and curled up on the couch beside her daughter. Aurora giggled, playing with her mother's hair. This, right here, was the real victory. Peace, truth, freedom. Marie sent a text. "The whole city's talking. Again, you broke the internet. Again." Jacqueline replied simply, "Good, let them talk. I'm just getting started." They called her many names over the months. The scorned wife, the silent strategist, the comeback queen. But Jacqueline Lynn never saw herself as any of those things. To her, she was simply a woman who refused to break. The morning after the Empire City Awards, as the headlines lit up the internet and her name trended once again, Jacqueline sat quietly at her kitchen table, sipping tea while Aurora slept in her nursery. No camera flashes, no red carpets, just peace. This is what she had fought for. Not the applause, not the revenge, but the right to exist freely, without pretending. She looked out the window at the skyline that once towered over her like a god she had to worship. Now, it looked smaller somehow, less threatening, because she had grown taller, and this time she wasn't alone. The doorbell rang. Marie entered with fresh flowers and a knowing smirk. "Someone sent these," she said, placing a bouquet of wild sunflowers, Jacqueline's favorite, on the table. There was no card, just a single gold key attached to a note. "You hold the door now. To everything." Jacqueline smiled softly. It wasn't from Ambrose. It was from a founder she had mentored, now one of the youngest CEOs in clean energy. Jacqueline's influence had begun to ripple, and it wasn't because of her money, it was because she listened. She taught. She believed. Later that day, Jacqueline was scheduled to appear on a major national talk show, the one she had declined 5 times before. This time, she said yes. Not to relive the scandal, but to speak about the future. She wore a simple navy wrap dress. No glitz, no glamour, just intention. She walked onto the stage to polite applause, not thunderous like at the gala, but respectful, measured. The host smiled. "Jacqueline, welcome. First question, how does it feel to be one of the most talked about women in the country?" Jacqueline smiled calmly. "Overwhelming and humbling, but also irrelevant." The audience chuckled. She continued. "Fame is a wave. It comes, it goes. But who you are beneath it, that's what matters." The host leaned in. "What do you think changed the game for you?" Jacqueline paused, then answered simply, "I stopped asking for permission." The room fell silent. She looked into the camera. "I stopped asking the world if I was enough, if I deserved to lead, if I was qualified. I realized I already was. We all are." The host nodded. "And what would you say to the women watching tonight who feel stuck, who are silent in their own stories?" Jacqueline didn't hesitate. "Your silence doesn't protect you. It only delays the storm. Speak. Even if your voice shakes, even if you cry, even if you're afraid, speak. Because once you do, everything starts to change." Applause. Not just from the audience, but from people across the country. The clip went viral, again, but more than that, it sparked something. Women began sharing their own Aurora moments. Not revenge, but rebirth. Not bitterness, but bravery. They tagged each other with "Rise like Jacqueline." They quoted her line, "The fall doesn't define you, the rise does." And Jacqueline? She went back home, tucked Aurora in, and cried softly, not out of pain but pride. Because this was never about punishment, it was always about possibility. Months passed. Jacqueline launched a new mentorship platform, partnered with global organizations to fund education for girls in underserved countries. She appeared at the UN. She declined a memoir deal. Twice. She didn't want to capitalize on pain. She wanted to build from it. One spring afternoon, as cherry blossoms bloomed along the avenue, Jacqueline walked Aurora through the park. People passed, some waved, some whispered, but most just smiled. Not out of awe, but out of connection. A woman pushing a stroller stopped beside her. "Miss Lynn," she said, "I just wanted to say, thank you. I left my husband after watching your speech. I found my voice." Jacqueline squeezed her hand. "You always had it, you just finally used it." Later, as the sun dipped low, she sat on a bench, Aurora asleep in her arms. She whispered, "You'll never have to shrink to make others comfortable, not while I'm alive." Then she looked up at the horizon. The city still bustled. The world still spun. But for the first time in a long time, Jacqueline wasn't chasing anything. She had arrived, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. Because in the end, her story wasn't about betrayal or business or even revenge. It was about a woman who rediscovered her worth and made damn sure no one would ever forget it again. So the story has ended, our wonderful friends. Are you still here, even now? If you are, it means something in this journey has touched your heart. Maybe a memory, a pain, or a quiet strength inside you that's been waiting to rise. You see, Jacqueline's story isn't just hers. It's a mirror for every woman who's been underestimated, every person who's been broken, and still chose to rebuild. She didn't rise for revenge. She rose for herself, for her daughter, for truth, and maybe, just maybe, so that you would remember, you don't need to be whole to begin again. You just need to be brave enough to try. As the heterodox saying goes, when the wound stops bleeding, the lesson begins. Healing is messy, power is quiet. But you, just like Jacqueline, are already enough. If this story moved you, like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that hit deep. We're here together.